Chapter 10, Legend and Doctrine. Theocritus, in his 12th ideal, said, about always his tomb, the children gather in their companies at the coming in of the spring and contend for the prize of kissing. Aisha, the pretty daughter-in-law of the Sheikh Gula, had spoken to me several times of a shrine in the hills called Usibil Canary. She was the young wife of a man who had stabbed his sister and mother of a baby son some 12 months old. To her little son she was passionately devoted, and her healthy, rosy face and the baby's round one were never far apart. Now, maybe the person they wanted to avoid just didn't have ointments and stuff like that, too, to treat their face. The sun shone out after Sunday's rain, and we sent for Aisha, who had offered to guide us. The young woman appeared with her baby on her arm, its weight half supported by her mizar. If we are going into the hills, we said, will not your arm ache? She kissed the child and assured us that since she carried him always, she never felt him heavy. So we started, Aisha, Jadon, the baby, and its small cousin, and myself. We took the road to Ras Al Ain, bearing to the left of the winding stream and following a mule track cut in the rock. In the valley sounded the carefree notes of a reed pipe. A shepherd lad sat piping by the wayside and smiled as we paused to listen to the bird-like fluting. His pipe he had cut himself on the hills as he herded his flock. As we set up the hill, the baby crowed and chuckled, and the small girl cousin gave him flowers, which he crushed in his hot little fist. All the way, despite the rockiness, it was flowers, flowers, flowers. Below, long strips of calico had been spread to whiten. It comes from Japan, said Aisha, and is bleached by washing at the spring. While it was wet, we spread horse manure over it for the space of a night. The next day we wash and dry it, rewashing and redrying in the sun many times until it becomes as white as snow. We went past a rock tomb, and a little farther the mule track branched left. The road to Sheikh Ada, said Aisha. It was by this road that most pilgrims went before the days of cars to Sha'akan. Traveling by mule, a pilgrim might hope to arrive at the shrine in 2 days and a bit, unless stopped by brigands. I was reminded of Acradina in Sicily at every step. By the tomb, the smell of herbs, the wild flowers, and the ancient rocky road, and Aisha herself was like a comely Syracusan maid, though her dress was far more exotic than any seen in Sicily. She was crowned by no headdress of silver coins, but wore a white turban instead. When I asked if she had one, she said, with the trace of a sigh, that she had sold hers for a dinar, and I imagined that it had gone to help her husband and his family in their trouble. At one point in the path, the cone of Melke Meron below is framed by the rocks of the gorge. It stands milky fair against the far range of blue valleys, painted, as it were, and ever fainter washes until lost against the horizon. An hour's steady mounting brought us to the head of the gorge. On one side rose the spire of the Mazar we had come to see. On the hill opposite the gorge were ruined stone buildings. Aisha told us that they were very ancient, perhaps 2,000 years old. People of Wadim called Gorastan lived there. But when Muhammad came, there was a battle, and they were all killed, and their houses cast down. They say that their blood is still to be seen upon the stones. She referred, I suppose, to the rusty red lichen that grows on the rocks hereabout. She and I and Jadon sat on a rock, overhanging the gorge, full of energy and accustomed to mountain climbing. In Switzerland, strode on upwards, anxious to reach the highest point. Jadon looked after her admiringly. Like a gazelle, he murmured. When the baby beat his mother on the chest, she readily gave him her breast, and he rested on her broad lap in perfect content, half dreaming, half smiling, too content to make more than a pretense of sucking. When we moved on, he fell asleep, his small dimpled hand falling limp over his mother's shoulder. Wild thyme grew all about us, also a kind of sage with a balm-like fragrance, and another herb that gave out a pungent perfume like incense in the hot sun. Rejoined us, having had a far view from the watershed at the top, and Dawn complimented her on her swiftness amongst the rocks. She told him that these hills were nothing compared to the Alps, to which even the snow mountains in high Kurdistan, which she had seen from the top of the rock, were younger sisters. The mazar was of the usual pattern and, as far as I could see, contained no tomb. We climbed down to the olive garden just below us. By the spring was a cavern, maidenhair fern growing thickly in its grateful dampness, and, just as I had expected, the sacred tree by the sacred spring, this time a fig tree, adorned with votive rags. As we had none to add to them, we tied grasses to a bow instead. Stone gutters conducted the water to a cistern. Downwards. The olives looked neglected, but it was a little paradise of green, and flowering willow grew with the figs and other trees. The rocks in this narrow apex of the gorge looked like masonry, and it was difficult to persuade oneself that they had not been hewn by man. On the return journey, borrowed Aisha's baby, who was surprised but not displeased by the change of portress. But we could not persuade them to come in to drink tea with us. Mikhail had hardly brought it in when a guest arrived, the Assyrian Presbyterian missionary, a masculine figure in +4s. As he drank tea, he talked well and informed us that not only had he made a study of the Yazidi people, but had written about them in American papers. He told us that though the villages of Bashika and Bahsani were, in a manner of speaking, a mere stone's throw from each other, the former was more progressive than the latter, thanks to the school, and that in Bahsani ancient customs were preserved, which had been discontinued in Bashika. Now, progressive and preserving tradition aren't necessarily contrary terms. Your visit causes much speculation, he said, smiling. I was told that you had asked to take the photograph of a woman having a baby, as you had not seen such things in your country. English babies being taken from their mothers by operation and not in the natural way. He was chatting thus, sipping his tea and looking very Western indeed, when a second visitor arrived, this time Kabal Savu, the chief Kabal, the person that says the hymns or plays the sacred music or something. He drank tea with us, and general subjects were being discussed when the Kawal asked what A was sewing. When he heard that it was a bed jacket for Sit Gula, he smiled and commended the deed of charity. Thereupon, our other friend remembered perhaps that he was a missionary for the Kawal's benefit, He enlarged upon the way in which Christian charity embraced peoples of all religions and kinds, such being the command of Christ, our prophet, making the slightly embarrassed text of his discourse. But Gawal, always mild and polite, received it with equanimity, although we felt a little out of countenance, which was foolish, for of course a missionary must improve the shining hour, like the busy bee, wherever he perceives pagan honey that might be gathered into the hive of Protestant certainty. Well, I don't know about certainty, and I don't know about pagan, but because pagan and heathen, using it as terms of other religions, turns it into hate speech, doesn't it? If you're talking about their housing style or something, sure, I'm okay with that. That was the Greco-Roman way of those terms, but he left us anon. Kowal remaining alone, he had a liking for his gentle face and diffident manner, and ventured to put some questions to him. His constant reply was, "How should we know? We are men, and these things are in the hand of God." It may have veiled his reluctance to answer an outsider, but it was very pleasant as a veil, and I asked him about their traditions concerning creation in by Tigris and Euphrates, London, Hertz and Blackett, 1923. I related third-hand the story about the pearl, the creation of Adam and the bird, a childish fable which Ufe relates as a Yazidi legend. He gave no such story, but answered simply that it was God who created the world and not his angels first. There were light and darkness, then earth, sky, and stars. And then the earth and its living creatures came into being, and lastly, Adam and Hawa. Hawa is an older version of the word for Eve. He repeated the tale of the two jars. According to this, Hawa, Eve, claimed that children were her production and that Adam had no part in them. Adam suggested a test. He placed some of his spittle and Eve some of hers in two separate jars and kept them sealed for 9 months. At the end of that period, Adam opened his jar and found within a beautiful boy and girl, whereas Eve's jar contained nothing but corruption. And so, one of the things, I don't know if the word for spittle and sexual fluid is the same, or whether they used spit as euphemism, right? He denied that the Yazidis had a different descent from the rest of mankind. Asked about the fate of the soul after death, he said that the souls of the wicked go into the bodies of beasts or reptiles. That is their hell. But that for the obstinately wicked, there is a hell of fire from which there is no emergence, except, he added, that none know what the mercy of Allah may do. The good reincarnate in human bodies after a sojourn in paradise, but in the end of all things, if they are completely purified, they unite with the supreme God, remain in bliss, and return no more. I asked why they paid such a special reference to the Peacock angel. He answered, "We do not believe, like Islam," he interjected tactfully, "that he is the Lord of evil, Shar. He is the chief of the 7 angels and is one with Gabriel, who removes the soul from the human body when Azrael comes for it. The evil in men's hearts is not from him, but from themselves." Well, Islam agrees that creations can choose good and evil, right? And the 7, well, whether you have them over 7 or one of the 7, and Gramenu are the ultimate devil. Above that, it sort of amounts to the same. It just kind of varies a little bit per myths. I asked him about the reverence paid to springs and trees. He answered that they were Maskun inhabited. We believe, he said, that there are beings, neither men nor jinn. So John and is jinn being the Arabic word for the fallen angels. People say that they are seen occasionally, and they call them Rajul al-Gaib or Gabe, but he added quickly, who sees them? 1 in 1,000. Why do you ask such things? You are English, and the English know better than we do. As for prayer, he told me that 5 prayers daily are ordered for the pious Yazidi, 1 at dawn, 1 at sunrise, 1 at noon, 1 in the afternoon, and 1 at sunset. Each time the worshiper must face the sun before praying, hands and face should be washed. Indeed, before all worship, the Yazidi should wash himself. And before any feast, the body should be cleansed completely in either hot or cold water, and white garments should be put on. Prayer is necessary before eating, before and festivals, he said, there are special prayers. And Islam, for example, differs because in fact that the early, there's late afternoon prayer instead of a morning prayer. And there's a dusk prayer instead of a midday prayer. The missionary had already told me that Yazidi prayers are rhymed, and a mixture of Kurdish and Persian prayers are learnt parrot-wise, and few, if any, understand them. He did not think that they would allow me to take down any of them, as they are regarded as extremely sacred. He also had warned me that on the Thursday night of the coming feast, I'm sure they mean what the Muslims call the Friday, or what the Bible would call the Friday, sunset after Friday, when Yazidis assembled in the courtyard of Sheikh Mohammed, no Christian or Muslim is permitted to be present. What they did during that night of vigil, no one knew. I fancied I knew what he was reluctant to hint, for the insinuation has been made against every secret sect in turn. The Sabaeans, Christians, and Jews have all been variously accused in ignorance that on a certain night of vigil they assemble in the dark, men and women, and that shameful connection takes place in the name of religion, none knowing who is with him in the darkness. It is as hoary a lie as that other about the Jews, that they eat the flesh of Christian children at Passover. Well, the Israelis don't eat bodies of the Christians at Passover, but we know what Israel has been doing in some places. And we have 5 dots. I think this is just a break at a certain point in the text. Maybe there was a graphic or whatever, but there could be missing words. April the 16th was the eve of the feast. Okay, so we're talking about Red Wednesday. Well, they collect flowers and they put the flowers on the doors that Tuesday night, and nothing terribly sinister, except maybe that there's a theology, right? While we were making breakfast, a visitor was announced. He was a monk of the Jacobites, accompanied by a lay henchman, and was a sober-looking man with a suspicious eye. He told me that he knew very much about the Yazidis, and I think that his visit may have been prompted by a vague resentment and partly by curiosity as to my real purpose in coming here and my personal beliefs. He began by talking of the Latin Catholics. Had I seen their grand new church? Had I visited it, attended a service, seen its pictures and images? The Pope had paid for it all. As for images, we Orthodox have none. The henchman, more loquacious than the monk, who spoke in short sentences, inserted here, we live by the piety of our own people. All that we have is the free gift of our own people, he went on. The great point of difference between the Latin Church and our own is purgatory. He asked me, where in the Bible is purgatory mentioned? A good man goes to heaven and an evil to everlasting fire, and there is an end of the matter. But what, I asked, of the majority, or neither good nor bad? The henchman waved the irrelevant question aside and related at length the story of Abraham's bosom and Lazarus, while the monk, furtively of A, inquired if I were a Muslim. Addressing me then, the monk informed me that he had written down many of the rhymed prayers of the Yazidis. I praised his enterprise and said that I should be interested to see them, but he was unwilling to show them, and I turned from the subject. You may find Yazidi priests who will answer your questions, he said, somewhat sourly, but for money. They are, not for what they were formerly. There are schools, and they are losing their people. Times are changed, but they are poor and will not give information for nothing. I told him that the real purpose of my visit was merely to see the spring festival, and that any other information I might gather was merely by the way. Humph, he said. Well, you will see nothing of what takes place within the shrine of Sheikh Mohammed on Thursday night. They will allow no Christian near them then. No one has seen what goes on. He rose to go, not having eaten or drunk with us, for it was still their Lent. Well, the Bible fasting was the 9th month, so totally different thing, right? After breakfast, we went to Sitgul's house and found her groaning in bed, and still in the same comfortless spot. She was pleased with A's gift of the jacket, which was tied on with the help of her daughters-in-law, but the quinine, she said, had done her little good. She complained that they neglected her, and a neighbor whispered to me that there was little love lost between her and her sons' wives. Perhaps she will die, remarked Aisha philosophically, when we had gone below. I had been attracted on a former visit by the industry of the Sheikah's handmaiden, who span in a room adjoining the place where her mistress lay ill. Now they brought down the spinning wheel and set it and the spinster in the sun, so that I might take a photograph. I gave Aisha a length of orange silk for the children's festival dresses, and this was extended to its length, and blessings called down on my head. On the previous day, I had taken a similar gift to the Mukhtar's wife, as a recognition of her kindness in furnishing cotton for the bed jacket. Sitgul's handmaiding at her spinning wheel. Okay, so to describe it, it looks like two people are operating it. Like one person's like holding the reins, and the other, like there's this pole and there's this wheel, so it's like part of an axle for a cart or something, almost like flipped upside down with like pedals that they're pushing at. A went off with her sketching materials. I followed her soon afterwards, as far as the washing pool at Ras Al Ain, seating myself beside some Christian women, who spread a garment for me on the grass beside them. One had her lap full of the daisy head flowers of the chamomile plant. She was picking off the stems and leaves, and I helped her as we talked. An infusion of these heads, she said, is good for fever and constipation. The older woman besides her took up a handful and added, when the flowers are dried, we put this much in a teapot, and add hot water till it is as thick as honey. Then we drink it. We call this kind Beiboun al-Laban. Some of the women washing clothes called out to inform that a tall woman, was farther up the valley. One said to me, "Why do you go about alone? Are you not afraid?" "Why should I be afraid? You people of Bashika are good people." They smiled approvingly at my answer and cried out, "Stay with us always." One woman was using, as well as her cake, of homemade soap, the saponaceous herb called shnan. It's a name given to different halophytic plants of the Chenopodiaceae family, for it had been pounded to a powder, and she gave me a little so that I might wash my hands at the spring. There was an air of expectancy about the village. At Rashid's house, his wife was busy stitching festival clothes, stretching the silk over a cushion as she sat on the matting to sew. His father, whose face was as open and intelligent as his son's, had returned from his visit to the Jebel Sinjar and brought with him Rashid's eldest boy, a pupil in his uncle's school, to spend the feast with his grandparents and parents. They made and gave me coffee, and then insisted I should wait to drink tea with them, setting before me a plate of dried figs from their garden in the Sinjar. The old man spoke with pride of his schoolmaster's son, who is regarded as an oracle in the village where he teaches. People come to him in every kind of difficulty, he said. Education is a fine thing. It opens the world before a man. I cannot read or write myself, but my grandsons, please God, shall be able to read all books. I could only repay with a platitude. Books are not everything, and no doubt your honor's experience and wisdom are as valuable to those about you as books to younger men. Then I consulted him about making a gift to the Yazidi poor on the occasion of the feast, to which the men of religion it should be handed. Which of them? A humorous smile lit up his eyes as he consulted Rashid. Perhaps both hinted the money would have as much chance of reaching the poor if it were entrusted to a responsible layman. I suggested that Rashid should accompany me when I made the modest offering, as a witness would ensure the distribution of the money. So eventually it was done, and the good Kawal Sivu, to whom I had handed the money, there and then divided it into smaller sums and dispatched one of his children to some of his poorer neighbors.